There she stood, a girl of just 13, her heart heavy with the weight of a world that deemed her unworthy. Her parents huddled in the corner of their dimly lit living room, faces shadowed by the flickering light of a single candle. They whispered harsh words, the kind meant to wound. Infertile, they muttered as if it were a curse. Worthless, they added, each syllable punctuated by the sound of her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. In the oppressive silence that followed, a face appeared, his face. A man with deep-set eyes and a beard rarely trimmed, a lumberjack named Thomas. His broad shoulders seemed to carry the weight of the forest itself, yet his heart was untouched by the cruelty that enveloped her home. He had wandered into their lives for the first time that evening, searching for supplies, when he overheard conversations that twisted like thorns around the girl's spirit. At that moment, something inside Thomas stirred. How could someone so young be cast away like an old coat? He watched as her eyes brimmed with tears, glistening like the raindrops that clung to the branches outside. The decision was made in an instant, a heartbeat governed by gut instinct. This girl deserved more than the darkness of her home. She deserved a chance to breathe. Within days, Thomas had made arrangements. A few dollars traded hands, a price to pay for her freedom. But what those bills represented was far greater than any currency. They stood for hope, for a life away from the stark whispers and the shadows that loomed over her every move. The girl, though hesitant, understood that it was a way out, a path into the light. As they walked away from the house, the girl's heart raced with a mix of emotions. Fear gripped her. She was stepping into the unknown. Yet there was something invigorating about it too. The sound of the forest was alive with the rustle of leaves and the gentle call of distant birds, a song of welcome. Thomas could sense her unease. "You're safe with me," he promised, his voice deep and calming. Those words were the anchor she needed, a small kiss of reassurance in a world that had offered her none. The cabin, his solitary home tucked away in the woods, was a modest place, adorned with the hand-carved remnants of his hard labor. The smell of fresh pine filled the air, mixing with the scent of earth as they entered together. It was a sanctuary, yet it felt foreign to her. "Let's make this our home," he said, lighting a fire that flickered to life in the hearth. As shadows danced across the walls, the girl felt a flicker of warmth. It reminded her of the moments before her parents' words had turned to blades. Thomas asked gently, breaking the silence that had settled like a heavy fog. "Clara," she whispered, almost afraid to speak, as if her voice would shatter the fragile calm around them. "Clara," he repeated, savoring the name on his tongue like a tune long forgot. "From now on, you can choose what that name means. The past is just that past." Days turned into weeks, and Clara began to blossom under the watchful gaze of the world around her. The forest was a teacher, offering lessons in resilience and beauty. She learned to admire the towering pines, to recognize the songs of the birds. Each day brought discoveries: the thrill of spotting a deer in the clearing, the gentle rustle of rabbits in the brush, the way the sun filtered through the leaves like liquid gold. Thomas took pride in showing her the way. He would carve wooden figures for her, roping her into his work as he shaped animals and trees with ardent care. She watched his hands move with the kind of artistry she had never known, and with every finished piece, a bond grew, a bridge constructed from trust, courage, and the quiet understanding that they shared an unwritten story. Yet shadows still lurked at the edges of Clara's mind. The ache of her past had yet to fully fade. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Clara's voice trembled as she spoke. Thomas paused, his gaze locked onto the crackling flames. "Then we'll face them together," he replied, his voice steady, a pillar of strength in her uncertainty. "You are not a possession." His words washed over her, a balm to soothe the scars that lingered inside her. She closed her eyes, letting his promise anchor her, and in that moment something shifted. For the first time, she felt the possibility of a new life settle gently in her soul. But the world outside was not as forgiving as the tranquil forest. Whispers traveled through the trees, echoing on the wind. Clara's parents, in their bitterness, turned their pain into a witch hunt of sorts. They sought out Thomas, brandishing slanderous accusations and fierce anger. Clara could hear them from the distance, the shouts piercing the serene atmosphere she had come to love. She cried as he stepped outside, face set in determination. "I won't," he assured her, taking her hand and squeezing it tightly. And she did. Her heart raced with fear as she listened through the walls. Outside, voices erupted like thunder, yet Thomas held his ground. Hours felt like days until, finally, a thick silence cloaked the cabin. She held her breath, anxiety coiling in her stomach, waiting for any sound that would reveal his fate. When he finally stepped through the door, he was weary but unbroken. "It's all right, Clara. They left," he said softly, yet his eyes betrayed a storm beneath the calm facade. They could feel the tension, the shadows of doubt approaching them once more. Days turned to weeks again, and the shadows did not relent. The fear pulsed through Clara's veins like a poison. Yet Thomas proved to be her anchor, teaching her the power of resilience. Each morning they would rise early, welcoming the sun as it stretched over the horizon. Together they worked, and through each task, the chopping of wood, the gathering of herbs from the underbrush, their bond solidified. But whispers from the world outside were relentless, prowling closer with every passing day. Clara felt their weight progressively heavy on her heart. One cold night, after a particularly harrowing argument between her parents that echoed in her mind, she lay awake, staring at the wooden beams above. She finally called out, her voice barely above a whisper. He was beside her in an instant, kneeling by her bed. His eyes softened, the flickering candlelight casting shadows that danced on his rugged face. "Home isn't a place, it's the people you share it with." In those simple words, Clara found a comfort she hadn't fully grasped before. As the days melded into seasons, she found contentment entwined with the bittersweet tangle of memories of her past. The forest embraced her, the wild flora and fauna extending their kindness, while Thomas's steady presence promised safety. But just when Clara thought she could breathe free, fateful news broke through the tranquility. Men from the neighboring town came searching, huddled under the moonlight like specters seeking the lost. Thomas caught the murmurs first, the whiffs of danger creeping into their peaceful life. "They know I'm here," Clara said, fear gripping her again. "We'll face whatever comes together," he assured her once more. But a part of him knew that they would need to prepare for battle. As the sun dipped below the horizon, cloaking their cabin in shadow, Thomas ventured out, surveying the approach of nightfall's intruders. Clara watched, her heart pounding, knowing that their world was on the brink of collapse once again. The ensuing confrontation was like a storm erupting, furious and unrelenting. Clara's heart raced as voices screamed, accusations slung like arrows aimed at Thomas's character. They shouted, hatred twisting their features. But Thomas stood firm, each word escaping his lips like a shield. "She belongs to no one but herself." In the ensuing chaos, Clara felt empowered. For so long, fear had shackled her spirit, but now she found her voice amidst the clamor. She shouted, her voice ringing clear and strong as the echoes of the night enveloped them. "I'm not an object." Surprise danced across the faces of those who sought to take her away, and in those moments of tension, Clara understood her truth. She would not allow herself to be defined by her parents' bitterness or society's expectations. Finally, the voices began to fade. The intruders, struck by the conviction of the girl who had found her power, retreated, leaving her standing side by side with the man who had saved her. The aftermath of that night didn't simply leave a changed girl and a staunch defender. It left a community intrigued, for in Clara's bravery, they saw the reflection of a stronger future. And slowly, Thomas and Clara became woven into the fabric of that place, not as mere shadows, but as resilient figures carved from the wilderness of trials and triumph. With every passing season, Clara flourished under Thomas's guidance, growing not just as a survivor, but as a leader in her own right. The bond they forged was one of family, more profound than blood ties, a union of shared moments, battles fought together, and a dream once held tightly in the clutches of doubt. And when the last leaves fell from the trees each autumn, Clara would find solace in the knowledge that what began as a story of abandonment would weave itself into an epic of hope, survival, and unbreakable connection. And as the forest bore witness to their lives, it whispered tales of resilience into the wind, sending ripples of courage to every corner of their world. They became beacons, two souls intertwined, standing strong against the ever-encroaching darkness. She stood at the threshold of her childhood home, eyes wide as the evening shadows danced around her like whispered secrets. Clara, just 13 years old, had just walked away from the life she knew, and yet she felt the weight of the past pressing heavily on her shoulders. Her parents had made a choice, an unimaginable choice, when they decided that because she was infertile, she was a burden. It was a choice that would change everything. The night was thick with tension as she turned her back on the house. It loomed behind her, a dark silhouette against the bruised sky, whispering echoes of her parents' harsh words. The flicker of candlelight inside cast long shadows that seemed to stretch for her, begging her to stay. But she could not anymore. In that moment of desperation, fate intervened. Thomas, the lumberjack who lived deep in the woods, happened to be passing by. He was known in the small town for his quiet demeanor and strength, but was also a man isolated by his own choices. His heart was like the towering trees he worked around, solid, but hiding its vulnerability. When he saw Clara standing there, a girl lost between childhood and a cruel reality, his heart stirred. He inquired, his voice deep yet gentle. She looked up, and for the first time she saw kindness in a stranger's eyes. With tears brimming, she whispered the truth, everything she had just endured. In that vulnerable moment, something shifted within Thomas. He felt a protective urge, a rush of emotion. He asked, not quite sure how to voice the feelings rising in him. Without waiting for a response, he reached out a hand, his rough palms warm, grounding her in chaos. With a hesitant nod, she took it. As they made their way through the thick woods that night, the branches overhead twisted like old memories, arching into a place where she believed hope could be found. The moon peeked through, glistening on the path ahead, and for the first time, Clara felt the pulse of freedom. Arriving at his cabin, Thomas pushed open the door to a new world, a humble space, rustic yet full of potential. The scent of pine enveloped them, mingling with the warmth of the fireplace. Thomas began lighting a fire, flames crackling to life, casting flickering patterns on the walls. "You're safe here," he assured her, though both of them knew safety was fragile. As Clara took a tentative step inside, uncertainty gnawed at her heart. Every corner of this space held the promise of both healing and fear. She whispered, the shadow of her parents looming large in her mind. "Then we'll face them together," Thomas promised, his voice steady. "You're not a possession to be owned or traded." His words were a balm to her hidden wounds. Days turned into weeks, and Thomas became much more than just the man who rescued her. He became her protector, her mentor, and slowly, the father figure she had lost. They spent afternoons exploring the forest, where Clara began to playfully embrace the world around her. She watched as the leaves danced in the wind and saw the beauty in life's small details. The way a bird crafted its nest, the sound of a stream trickling, the feel of fresh earth between her fingers. Under Thomas's care, Clara found herself blooming. Each day, he taught her essential skills like woodworking, the delicate art of creating something beautiful from raw materials. Her laughter filled the cabin as she fumbled with tools, her small hands learning to shape timber while Thomas watched with a pride unlike anything she had known before. He would exclaim as she sawed through a piece of wood, her cheeks flushed with joy. He knew the power of encouragement. It was a gift he had never received himself. With each passing day, Clara's spirit began to mend, thread by thread. However, nightmares often crept back into her mind. What if her parents found out she was safe? What if they tried to take her back? The tightening of her chest would pull her from sleep, a phantom wresting away her peace. Each time she confronted these demons, Thomas would be there, patiently reminding her of the strength found in vulnerability. Yet one cold evening, fully aware that the shadows had returned, Clara heard the telltale sound of voices outside the cabin. Her heart raced as she overheard the angry shouts of men, the bitterness unmistakable. Her pulse quickened. They were looking for her. Panicked, she turned to Thomas. She gasped, fear creeping through her veins like ice. "They can't take you from me," he assured her, but his face betrayed an understanding of the strife coming their way. Clara recognized the resolve in his eyes. He was preparing for battle. Outside, the men pounded on the door, demanding that Clara be returned to them. They shouted, but the weight of their words felt more like an anchor than a claim to her. One of them yelled. Thomas squared his shoulders, stepping in front of Clara, a protective wall against the tempest brewing them. "You'll have to go through me first," he called back, voice firm as oak. In that instant, Clara felt the electricity of his strength radiate through the room. The moment stretched, thick like fog in the air, until finally the door swung open. There they stood, a band of fury, faces twisted in desperation and anger, and all Clara could think about was her own heart thundering in her chest. One of the men sneered, pointing at Clara, the girl who had become so much more than their pawn. "I'm not hiding her," Thomas replied, stepping forward. "She's not yours to take. She's a person." The tension crackled like the fire in the hearth, the men hesitating for just a flicker of time as they processed his words. Clara felt the weight of their eyes. They were seeking what they thought was rightful ownership, yet she felt utterly free in Thomas's unwavering gaze. In that charged moment, something inside Clara ignited. The fear that once turned her insides to ice shattered into courage. She cried out, her voice ringing clear as a winter's bell. The men exchanged puzzled glances, but Clara stood her ground, heart racing yet fiercely determined. "I'm not a burden," she declared, and in that moment truth illuminated the darkness. Stunned, the intruders hesitated, their resolve faltering against the conviction of a girl who had reclaimed her power. Slowly, the tension began to dissipate, uncertainty replacing their fierce anger. They retreated, their shadows fading into the night, while Clara and Thomas stood standing, their bond stronger than ever. That night, as the bluish light of dawn crept in, Clara felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Thomas had defended her, but more importantly, he had helped her find her voice. She was no longer ashamed of her past. Instead, it had fueled her fight, fanned the flames of her resilience. Weeks turned into months, but the threat never fully disappeared. Clara, now steadfast in her resolve, shifted her focus from fear to growth. She tended to the garden outside the cabin, planting seeds of hope, where flowers bloomed defiantly amidst the surrounding trees. The garden mirrored her transformation, every new bud a testament to her journey of healing. As the seasons shifted, so did her life with Thomas. She found purpose, pouring herself into their shared projects. Together, they built furniture, and the cabin that once felt like a shelter began to transform into a home, resonating with laughter, warmth, and the spirit of two souls determined to rise from the ashes. Each piece of handcrafted wood was not just useful, it was imbued with love and intent. But as Clara crafted her new reality, she remained aware of the darkness lurking beyond the edge of the woods. She had chosen this life, but reminders of what she had left behind echoed like ghosts in her dreams. Thomas understood this, always encouraging her to face the past rather than run from it. One day, as they were working side by side, Clara finally approached him. His brows furrowed, consideration etched on his face. "I think we deserve to tell our stories," she replied, determination fueling her words. He nodded slowly, the corners of his mouth turning up into the slightest smile. "All right then." Thus began a new chapter in Clara's life, a venture into the heart of the nearby town. Hand in hand with Thomas, they faced the very people who once deemed her disposable. Inside her, a mix of anxiety and hope churned as they entered the gathering place. The air buzzed with whispers, and though many eyed them warily, something shifted in the atmosphere as Clara took her place at the forefront. "I'm Clara," she introduced herself, her voice steady and calm, echoing through the silence. "I'm not an object to be sold." As she spoke, she felt the tension dissipate, and she realized she held the power of her own narrative. With each word, she painted a picture of resilience, of strength, of the love she found in the heart of the forest with Thomas. The audience listened intently, and she saw their expressions shift from curiosity to understanding. In the weeks that followed, the townspeople began to see her differently. Instead of whispers that shamed her, they listened to her journey, recognizing the human behind the label. Slowly, she became a symbol of strength, her story intertwining with Thomas's legacy of kindness, reshaping perceptions in ways that rippled far beyond their forest. As seasons shifted and years passed, Clara blossomed into a remarkable woman, a leader of her community, welcoming those who had been cast aside and offering them hope, just as Thomas had done for her. The lumberjack who had once lived in isolation now stood proud beside her, a father figure whose strength and guidance had given her the wings to soar. She built bridges not just in wood, but in the hearts of the people. They had transformed the old narratives into new stories of empowerment. Her past was not a haunting weight, but a testament to the power of love, the strength found in vulnerability, and the beauty woven in the tapestry of human connection. And each time Clara returned to the forest, she felt the trees whispering their secrets, a reminder that her journey, once born of despair, had morphed into a legacy of hope, illuminating paths for those still lost in the dark. Together, Clara and Thomas had carved their names into the very heart of the world, a saga of resilience and connection that echoed long after the final chapter was told. She stood barefoot in the cold kitchen, the moonlight streaming through the cracked window, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. Clara was only 13, but already she knew the stinging bitterness of betrayal. This wasn't just any night. This was the night her parents had decided her fate a fate they deemed unworthy because she was infertile. The hushed voices from the living room pierced her heart like shards of glass. Her mother hissed, a mixture of bitterness and fear lacing her words. Clara pressed her small hands against the wall, trying to drown out the sound. It was as if the walls around her were closing in, pulling her back into a nightmare from which there was no escape. Just then, a knock echoed through the house, cutting through her despair like a bolt of lightning. She turned, heart racing, as the door creaked open. Thomas, the lumberjack who lived on the edge of town, stepped inside, rugged and strong. He had come for supplies but found himself entangled in a scene that froze his heart. He had heard the hushed murmurs of Clara's plight, but he had never witnessed it firsthand. There she was, a fragile girl at the edge of losing everything. He asked, his voice a gravelly whisper laced with concern. Clara's parents turned, their eyes narrowing at the intrusion. "She's not yours to save," her father barked, his face twisted with anger and denial. In that instant, a spark ignited in Thomas. He had always been a solitary figure living in a world of trees and silence, but this was different. He could see Clara, truly see her, a beacon of light wrapped in shadows. Instinct kicked in. "I'll take her," he declared, his voice resolute. Clara blinked, parsing the gravity of what had just unfolded. She echoed, fear and hope colliding in her chest. Was it possible? "Come with me, Clara," Thomas said, reaching out a hand toward her. It was rough and callous, but infused with a warmth that felt like safety. Without thinking, Clara took that hand. In that fleeting moment, her life shifted. She glanced back at her parents, their faces etched with disbelief and anger, but she refused to let their shadows follow her. She stepped beyond the threshold of her home, crossing into a realm filled with uncertainty but also the promise of freedom. The woods enveloped them as they walked, the moonlight filtering through the trees like a mystical guide. The air was fresh, tinged with the scent of pine, and Clara sensed the weight lifting off her shoulders with each step. Together, they journeyed deeper into the heart of the forest, where Thomas's cabin stood like a solitary guardian. It was modest but sturdy, nestled among the tall pines like a well-kept secret. Thomas pushed the door open, and the warmth of the fire inside welcomed them. Clara stepped in tentatively, feeling the soft glow wash over her like a warm hug. This was unlike anything she had ever known. Thomas busied himself with kindling while Clara stood in the corner, unsure of where she belonged. The darkness she had carried with her began to rear its head again, the haunting words of her parents replaying in her mind. "They think I'm worthless," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "They don't know you," Thomas replied, his gaze steady as he kindled the flames. "You're not worthless, you're a person." His words hung in the air, wrapping around her like a protective cloak. Clara felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. Maybe she could become something more than what her parents had dictated. Days melted into weeks as Clara acclimated to life in the cabin. Nature became her classroom and Thomas her patient teacher. He showed her how to chop wood, the rhythmic swing of the axe empowering her little by little. Each task filled her with a sense of purpose, and as she learned to weave skills into her everyday life, the scars of her past began to heal. But shadows lurked at the edge of her newfound happiness. The scalding words of her parents haunted her nights, creeping back into her dreams like a dark mist. One evening, while they were carving figures out of fallen branches, Clara's voice trembled as she spoke. What if they come looking for me, Thomas? The air thickened with tension, and for a moment there was silence. If they do, we'll face them together, he assured her, a weight of sincerity anchoring his words. You are not a possession. You are Clara. In his eyes, she found a flicker of strength, and with it, she began to face the demons lurking behind her. Whenever she felt doubt, she would find solace in the chores they did together. Each swing of the axe seemed to sever ties to her past, giving her a clearer vision of her future. The cool nights, filled with the crackling of the fire and the rustling of wind through the trees, began to soften the memories of despair. She learned the songs of the birds and immersed herself in the beauty of the forest. But no matter how much she cherished her time there, the specters of her past continued to loom. Then one fateful evening, just as dusk settled in, ominous clouds gathered on the horizon. They could hear voices, angry, seeking echoing through the thicket. Clara's heart raced as fear gripped her once more. Thomas stood stoic at the door, his silhouette framed against the dim light of the inside. Clara, stay back, he commanded softly. She asked, fear hitching her voice. Then we'll show them how strong you are, he said, resolve coursing through his words. The door rattled as the fists drew closer. Her parents had come to claim what they believed was theirs. The scene that unfolded was like a ferocious storm. Shadows spilled into the cabin, and then there they were, her parents, eyes wild with rage and desperation. Her mother shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Clara. She's a person, Thomas countered, standing his ground. The conflict spun like a web in the air, every accusation a tangled thread binding Clara's heart. She saw the flicker of anger, but buried beneath it was desperation, a longing to be understood. She cried, stepping forward, her voice strong against the storm. Their faces flickered with a moment of surprise, caught off guard by the conviction in her words. Clara interrupted, feeling the fire rise within her. Didn't recognize that I'm a person, not just a vessel for your dreams. There was a charged silence, the air snapping like a taut rope, and in that moment something shifted. Her parents weren't expecting the defiance from their daughter. Clara sensed a palpable change. The weight of their expectation lifted as they realized she had claimed her power. The confrontation that night stretched into the early hours, but eventually her parents left, their angry voices fading into the distance. Exhausted, Clara sank into a chair by the fire, her hands trembling but her spirit soaring. Thomas knelt beside her, his presence formidable yet comforting. You did well, he said softly, his eyes reflecting the flames dancing before them. That night marked a turning point for Clara. The girl who had once been sold off because of her perceived worth began to forge a new identity. Weeks turned into months, and as seasons changed, Clara flourished under Thomas's mentorship. The strength she found in herself echoed in the mighty trees surrounding them. One fateful spring afternoon, determination blossomed within Clara like wildflowers through the forest floor. I want to give back, she told Thomas, bright-eyed with new ideas. Thomas smiled, knowing this moment was a vital step. Together they created wooden toys and crafts, inviting children from nearby towns to join in their projects. As Clara laughed and played with the children, she saw her past slowly fading into the background, replaced by new bonds, a different kind of family. As they held workshops, Clara became a beacon of hope, her story resonating with others who felt lost. Like her, they too grappled with shadows. Clara shared her experiences, not hiding the pain but illuminating it, showing them that life doesn't have to be dictated by someone else's perception. But always standing beside her was Thomas, the lonely lumberjack who had taken her in when the world deemed her worthless. Together, they nurtured a community woven together by the strength of shared experiences. Clara's heart swelled with purpose, each day reminding her of the beautiful complexity of life. As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, casting golden rays across their small fence, Clara stood remarkable in her journey, no longer shamed by her past, but empowered by it. Each laughter, each child who now found solace in their space turned the cabin into a sanctuary. Their story became a living testament to resilience, a reminder that every person's worth is defined by the choices they make for themselves. Years passed, and the forest transformed around them, but the truth remained grounded. Clara and Thomas became figures of fortitude, symbols of the possibility of change, even when life had seemed like a winding maze that tore them in different directions. In the end, Clara learned that her worth was not connected to the shadows others cast upon her. It was instead tethered to the light she chose to create, a light that guided her, illuminating paths for those still lost. She lived not just to survive, but to flourish, thriving where once she had only been regarded as a burden. And there, amidst the symphony of rustling leaves, deep in the heart of the forest that had become a home, they forged a new legacy, one born of healing, strength, and the unbreakable spirit that lives within us all. Clara stood in the cold, dimly lit kitchen, tears streaming down her cheeks as her parents argued just beyond the door. Their voices cut through the air like a jagged knife. "She's useless." Her mother's voice rang with sharpness, and Clara could feel each word digging into her heart. She pressed her hands to her ears, trying to block out their anger, the weight of their disappointment washing over her like a heavy shroud. At just 13, she didn't fully grasp the harsh reality of infertility, but she understood betrayal all too well. All her life, she had been told that her worth depended on her ability to become a mother someday. Just then, a knock disrupted her thoughts. Clara turned sharply, her heart racing. It was the kind of sound that could either save her or push her deeper into despair. The door creaked open, and there stood Thomas, the lumberjack. His broad shoulders filled the doorway, rugged yet kind. He had lived on the outskirts of town, a solitary figure known for his strength and silence. Clara had seen him in passing, always surrounded by trees as he worked. He asked, concern etched on his weathered face as he stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. His eyes scanned the kitchen and landed on Clara, the little girl who had captivated his attention many times as he traveled through town. "He has no idea what he's doing," her father barked, pointing at Thomas. But Thomas took a step closer, grounding his voice with a calm resolve. "I'm here for the girl," he said, his focus unwavering. Clara's heart soared just slightly. Could it be? A lifeline thrown into her stormy sea of despair. She glanced back at her parents, their faces twisted in anger and denial, but in that moment she felt something shift within her. Maybe she didn't have to be trapped in this agonizing situation. Maybe there was a way out. "Come with me, Clara," Thomas said, reaching out a strong, calloused hand. With a rush of emotion, she stepped forward. Somehow, she knew this man was her chance at freedom. As they walked away from her home, the cool night air filled her lungs, exhilarating yet terrifying. The shadows of the world she'd left behind lingered, but with each step, she felt a spark of hope ignite. Clara glanced back, her heart pounding in her chest, knowing that what she was leaving behind could never truly define her. The forest was alive, the nighttime chorus of rustling leaves and distant animal sounds wrapping around them like a warm promise. Thomas led the way to his cabin, a sturdy structure tucked away among the tall pines. Clara stepped over the threshold and felt the embrace of warmth from the crackling fire. This was unlike anywhere she had ever known. Thomas set to work making the place feel more like home, while Clara stood quietly in the corner, taking in her new surroundings. She could feel the pulse of the forest shivering through the walls, a comforting reminder that she was a part of something larger now. "You're safe here," Thomas assured her, his voice steady. But Clara fought against the sense of uncertainty bubbling inside her. Could she truly be safe? Would her parents come looking for her? The past lingered like a shadow, whispering insecurities that clawed at her. The first few nights were turbulent. Clara lay awake, pulled into memories that gripped her tightly. The scathing words echoed in her ears, a relentless reminder of how worthless she had been deemed. But each time those thoughts threatened to overwhelm her, Thomas was there. He had a way of grounding her, his presence a steadfast anchor in the storm. "Let's go for a walk," he suggested one evening, sensing her unease. As they strolled through the woods, Clara started to notice the beauty surrounding her. The forest was vibrant, alive with life, and each breath she took felt like an invitation to start anew. Thomas showed her the wonders of nature, teaching her to identify plants and tracks. He taught her the rhythm of the land, how to listen to the whispers of the trees and the calls of the animals. With each passing day, Clara grew more confident. She discovered she could chop wood, and the sound of the axe striking the tree became a melody of empowerment. The act of creating something with her own two hands awakened a passion within her that had long been dormant. Each swing of the axe felt like a promise of vow that she would reclaim her worth. But just when Clara felt herself finding solace, the weight of her past would creep back in. The ghosts of her parents' voices haunted every step she took. She asked Thomas one rainy evening, fear spilling from her eyes. "They can't own you," Thomas replied softly but firmly, kneeling beside her. "You decide where you belong." His words, like kindling, sparked a fire within her. Clara closed her eyes, allowing his assurance to pierce through the darkness. Slowly, the nights became less daunting. While she still felt the pull of her past, each day in the forest helped her redefine her narrative. Then, one day, the tranquility of their newfound life shattered. Clara and Thomas were inside when they heard a thunderous knock on the door, echoing through the cabin. Clara's heart plummeted as she recognized the voices outside her parents had found her. There was a moment when time seemed to stand still, her pulse pounding in her ears as they turned toward the door. "Open up," her father shouted, anger lacing his words. "She's our daughter." Clara froze, terror gripping her throat. She whispered to Thomas, panic rising like wildfire within her. He stood tall, casting a shadow that shielded her. "We face them together," he said, his voice steady and calm. "You're stronger than they know." Taking a deep breath, Clara felt the strength of his words wrap around her, offering courage in the midst of turmoil. She stood beside Thomas, heart pounding but determined to speak her truth. When he opened the door, her parents stormed inside, eyes wild with anger. Clara could see their desperation, but it was rooted in entitlement, believing they had a claim over her life. Her mother shouted, "We want you back." "No," Clara said, stepping forward, her voice surprisingly steady. "You don't get to decide. I'm not a possession or a burden." Their faces fell, disbelief spreading across their features. Clara felt something shift within her. This was her moment to reclaim her identity, her power. "You never accepted me for who I am. I'm not just a means to fulfill your dreams." The room fell silent as her parents processed her words. The fury that had once filled their eyes began to wane, replaced by confusion. Clara stood tall, fueled by the courage she had found in the forest and in her bond with Thomas. In that tense standoff, something shifted. Her parents couldn't comprehend that they had lost their hold over her. Realization swept over their faces, and slowly, reluctantly, they turned to leave. Clara didn't hate them. She felt sorrow for the way their expectations had clouded their love. When they were gone, the air in the cabin felt lighter, and Clara sank into a chair, tears flowing freely, now tears of relief, of release. "You did it," Thomas said, kneeling beside her. "You found your voice." In the days that followed, Clara began to build a new life. She invited children from the nearby town to Thomas's cabin. They worked together, creating things from the abundance of materials the forest provided. She saw herself reflected in their laughter and joy, filling spaces that had once felt empty. They learned about resilience and creativity in the heart of the woods, crafting toys and planting gardens. Every flower that bloomed was another testament to Clara's renewed hope. The forest was alive with the sound of children's laughter, a stark contrast to the loneliness that had once defined Thomas's life. As spring melted into summer, Clara blossomed. She no longer bore the weight of her past, and in teaching others she found her purpose. Her story resonated far beyond her cabin, becoming a narrative of triumph, strength, and the power of acceptance. But there were still moments when shadows would creep in, reminding her of what she had fought so hard to escape. The weight of her parents' absence settled over her like a brief storm. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara found herself sitting on the porch, staring into the forest. "Sometimes I wonder if they think about me," she confessed to Thomas, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe," he replied gently, sitting beside her. "But it's okay to let go. What matters most is who you are now and the life you've created." As the stars twinkled into view, Clara took a deep breath. She felt the stirrings of acceptance begin to weave through her heart. For the first time, she realized the truth. Her parents did not define her worth. She was not their vision of a daughter. She was her own person, alive with dreams and potential. Her laughter rang through the forest, lifting the weight from her heart. The bond she shared with Thomas had turned her life around, transforming her into someone powerful. The lonely lumberjack was no longer just a protector. He had become a father figure, a mentor, a friend. Every day brought new adventures and possibilities. The children came to play, their laughter filling the air, pushing away the remnants of sorrow. They assembled around the fire, sharing stories as Thomas looked on proudly, watching Clara thrive and shine. Her journey from abandonment to empowerment became a beacon for others, igniting hope for those who had felt lost. Clara realized she had the power not only to write her own story but to inspire others to reclaim theirs. Seasons turned, the world outside changing, but within her cabin, freedom thrived. Clara became known as a healer of hearts, someone who reminded others that their worth isn't defined by anyone else. She taught them the strength found in vulnerability, the courage to be themselves even when the world tries to force them into corners. As the years passed, Clara's life was a tapestry woven from the struggles she had faced and the love she had found. The forest embraced her as she embraced it back. She watched as flowers bloomed in wild colors and trees stood tall, creating a sanctuary for those who sought refuge. With each story shared around the fire, Clara's legacy grew. She knew the journey wasn't just her own now. It was a collective narrative, one that encouraged people to rise above the darkness, to find their own powerful voices. Together, Clara and Thomas forged a family built on love, acceptance, and resilience. The lonely lumberjack had found a daughter, and the girl who had felt lost became a beacon of hope. Together, they carved out a life that was vibrant, alive, and filled with purpose, a testament to the power of the human spirit. And so, in the heart of the forest, surrounded by laughter, life, and possibilities, Clara discovered not just a new home, but also a world where she could thrive, creating the destiny she had fought so hard to claim. For every moment of darkness had brought her to this beautiful reality, one that no one could ever take away. She stood quietly in the doorway, a shadow of herself, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. Clara could hear the heated whispers coming from the living room, sharp and accusatory. "She can't give us children." Her mother's voice pierced the air, slicing through the cold silence that surrounded her. At just 13, Clara was no stranger to these words, but they stung sharper than ever. The reality of her parents' disappointment hung in the air like a dark cloud. They had already deemed her a failure because of one issue: infertility. To them, she was a burden, and keeping her meant they'd never have the future they envisioned. What they had counted on, what they had dreamed of, was slipping away like sand through their fingers. Clara couldn't bear to listen anymore. She turned away from the flickering light of the living room, the obliterating shadows whispering taunts into her soul. Just then, a knock echoed against the door, jarring her from her despair. With trembling hands, Clara pushed the door open. There stood Thomas, the lumberjack known for his quiet strength. He had come to collect timber from her father, but there was something different in his eyes that night, something fierce, protective. It was a look that promised hope. "I need to speak with you," he said, stepping forward, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. He had overheard the words that cut through her. He understood what she was going through more than most. Before she could fully process what he was suggesting, a surge of emotion propelled her forward. Without a word, she reached for him, feeling his warm hand wrap around hers. Together, they stepped away from the suffocating air of her childhood home and out into the unknown. The night was thick with tension, each step away from her old life both liberating and terrifying. As the moonlight guided them through the thick trees surrounding their town, Clara felt a small flicker of hope ignite within her. This was the first time she could choose where she wanted to be, and for now, she chose to follow Thomas. His cabin was hidden deep in the woods, a simple structure worn by time but alive with character. As Clara entered, she was enveloped by warmth. The hearth roared with flames, casting shadows that danced on the walls. The smell of fresh pine mingled with the aroma of smoke, creating a sense of safety she had long thought she'd lost. The moment Clara stepped inside, a wave of uncertainty washed over her. This was unlike anything she had ever known. Thomas sensed her hesitation. "You're safe here," he assured her, his voice a steady anchor. "You can be whoever you want." But as days turned into nights, Whispers of her past clung to her like a second skin. She asked one evening, her hands shaking as she stirred the soup simmering on the fire. "They can't take you from me," Thomas replied, his gaze unwavering. "You're not a possession." His words knotted themselves into her heart, offering reassurance like fresh sunlight breaking through a storm. But still, every night felt heavy. Clara lay awake listening to the forest sounds, the rustle of leaves, the soft hooting of an owl, the crackle of the fire. And every morning became a fresh battle against the memories that haunted her. One rainy afternoon, while Thomas was out chopping wood, Clara ventured outside, feeling the cool droplets wash over her. She looked up at the trees, towering tall and mighty, and felt a sense of kinship with them. They had weathered storms much like she had, yet they stood firm. As she leaned against the trunk of one particularly grand pine, a thought struck her. What did it mean to truly belong? Days turned into weeks, and slowly she began to thaw, the ice that had encased her heart melting just a bit. Thomas taught her the ways of the forest, how to gather wild herbs, how to spot tracks in the mud. For the first time, Clara felt a sense of purpose. She learned to chop wood with precision, the rhythm of the axe becoming a soothing melody. Each swing felt like a release, a way to purge the pain of her past. But just when she thought she had conquered her fear, the ghosts of her old life came rushing back. Late one night, Clara jolted awake, breathless, the pit of her stomach churning. Her parents' angry faces filled her mind, their accusations ringing painfully in her ears. What if they came for her? What if they tried to take her back? The fear clawed at her, vicious and unrelenting. "Clara," Thomas said softly, sensing her distress as he entered the room. "They'll find me," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. Thomas knelt beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Listen to me. You are stronger than you think. You're not just a girl who was sold, you're a survivor." With his words, she began to feel a flicker of strength deep inside her. It was true, she was more than the fate her parents had tried to impose on her. Night after night, they would talk and share stories, and slowly, Clara found her voice. The shadows of her past began to wane, replaced by the vivid hues of her new life. Then one chilly evening, the silence was shattered by a loud banging on the door. Clara froze, dread washing over her. Her heart raced as she exchanged a glance with Thomas. It couldn't be them, could it? "Stay here," he commanded softly, his voice steady. He stepped to the door, and Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. When he opened the door, her heart sank. Her parents stood there, wild-eyed and frantic. Her mother pleaded, desperation drenching her words. "You're our daughter." Clara squeezed her eyes shut, her pulse roaring in her ears. It felt like the past had crashed back into her present, trying to pull her apart. Clara shouted, surprising even herself, "I won't go back." The room fell silent, the weight of her voice hanging in the air like a heavy fog. Her parents exchanged glances, disbelief and anger twisted into their features. Clara felt Thomas's presence behind her, a steady rock giving her strength. "You don't own her," he said firmly, stepping forward. "She is her own person." Clara's parents hovered near the threshold, their frustration palpable. They hadn't prepared for this. Her father sneered, his voice cracking under the pressure. "No," Clara said, her voice unwavering. "I know exactly what I want." In that moment, something shifted. The bond Clara had forged with Thomas and the life she was building became an impenetrable wall, pushing back against the tide of her parents' expectations. The fierce independence she found in the forest surged through her. Eventually, her parents turned and left, their silhouettes diminishing into the dark, and in that moment Clara felt an unexpected weight lift off her shoulders. The air in the cabin felt lighter somehow, and for the first time Clara could truly breathe. "I did it," she whispered in disbelief, a single tear sliding down her cheek. Thomas smiled, the corner of his mouth lifting in a proud grin. "You found your voice, Clara. You're no longer just a girl lost in a story written by someone else." As the days turned into months, the cabin became a sanctuary not just for Clara, but for many who sought comfort. She opened her doors to others, children like her who had found themselves on the outs, lost or forgotten. Together they crafted toys, weaving their stories into each project, laughter resonating inside the walls. The forest rang with joy as they worked, the sun casting golden light over their creations. Clara became a beacon, an embodiment of resilience, a living testament to the power of choice. But life wasn't devoid of challenges. The whispers of the world beyond the trees would sometimes creep back, doubts echoing in her mind. "You're just a burden," her inner voice would taunt. Thomas noticed her struggle, the way her smile would falter. "Clara," he said one afternoon after she had retreated into herself, "you are so much more than what they believed you to be." With his reassurance, Clara began to reclaim her trust in herself. She poured her energy into the children around her, teaching them that their narratives didn't have to be dictated by their circumstances. The laughter and joy they shared pushed the shadows away, and soon, the cabin thrummed with life. Then one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of purple and gold, Clara gathered everyone around a crackling fire. They roasted marshmallows, and the air was filled with a sense of belonging that warmed her heart. "Tell us a story," one of the children said, eyes bright with excitement. Clara asked, her heart swelling at the thought. The child exclaimed. And so she began to narrate her journey, each word spilling into the air like sparks. She spoke of betrayal, of courage, and of the incredible kindness of a lonely lumberjack named Thomas who had given her a chance. As she shared her tale, her voice strong and confident, the children listened wide-eyed, their own spirits igniting with possibility. Clara realized that sharing her story didn't just empower her, it lit a fire in the hearts of those around her. She began to see herself not just as a survivor, but as a leader, someone who could help others rewrite their own destinies. They were not just children, they were warriors in their own right, capable of pushing past the boundaries life had tried to impose on them. With each passing season, the forest flourished alongside them, a witness to their growth. The trees stood tall, their roots deep, and Clara finally understood the weight of her own roots. The woods had transformed from a place of fear to a sanctuary, and she had woven herself into its fabric just as it had embraced her. Years passed, and as Clara blossomed into a remarkable young woman, she was no longer defined by her past. The girl once told she was worthless became a leader of hope, a storyteller, an artist, a force of nature. And Thomas, the lonely lumberjack who had saved her, stood proudly by her side as more than a protector. He became her family, a mentor, a father. As she looked back at her journey, Clara marveled at how far she had come. No longer shackled by shame or regret, she embraced every part of herself. She understood that her story was not just her own, but a shared tapestry woven with the threads of every encounter she had made along the way. Together, they had transformed pain into purpose, weaving a new narrative defined by strength, compassion, and relentless hope. And there in the heart of the forest, amidst laughter and light, Clara found not just a home, but a legacy, a living testament to the power of choice, resilience, and the belief that no one's worth should ever be determined by another's vision. And with that, she continued to write her story, one of beauty, transformation, and boundless possibility. One cold, moonlit night, Clara stood trembling on the threshold of her own home, eavesdropping on a conversation that would change her life forever. She pressed her ear against the door, every word slicing through her heart. "What good is she to us?" Her mother spat, her voice laced with anger. Clara felt as if the ground beneath her was crumbling. She didn't understand all the implications of what her parents were saying, but the sting of their rejection felt as tangible as the bitter, cold air around her. At just 13, she had learned that her worth in the eyes of her parents hinged not on her character, but on her biology. Infertility, a word that felt like a stone dropped into the pool of her existence, rippling into every corner of her life. She turned away from the door, desperate to escape the suffocating weight of those harsh words. Just then, a silhouette appeared in the dim light of the doorway. It was Thomas, the lumberjack who lived alone on the edge of their small town. He was known for his strength, his deep voice, and the shadows of solitude that seemed to follow him like an unwelcome guest. He said softly, a hint of concern in his voice as he caught her in the act of listening. The moment felt surreal as she met his gaze. She had to decide what to say, but the truth was etched across her face. They said I'm worthless," she whispered, looking down at her feet, suddenly feeling so small. "I think you're worth a lot," he replied, his voice low but steady. He stepped closer, his presence warm against the chill surrounding her. "If you want to, you can come with me." What he proposed was not just a physical journey, it was the potential for a new life. Clara felt a flicker of hope. Without wasting another moment, she took a step forward and grasped his hand, the strength in his grip sending a wave of comfort through her. "Let's go," she said, her voice trembling but the resolve behind it stronger than ever. They slipped away from the suffocating air of the living room, out into the cloak of the night. The woods embraced them as they moved deeper, the towering trees standing like guardians on either side. With each step Clara took, she felt a weight lifting, leaving behind disappointment, judgment, and pain. Thomas guided her to his cabin nestled deep in the forest, a sturdy structure that exuded warmth and safety. The smell of burning wood greeted them as they stepped inside, a cozy haven filled with simple comforts. Clara inhaled deeply, the scent of pine mingling with the crackling fire offering a new kind of peace. "I know this is all new for you," Thomas said, noticing her hesitation as she took in her surroundings. He moved around the cabin, lighting the oil lamps to brighten the space. But Clara felt a tangle of emotions churning inside her. Would this man really keep her safe? Would she truly be free? As if reading her mind, Thomas turned to her and spoke firmly. "You can be whoever you want here. You're not a burden, you're not worthless." His words wrapped around her like a protective blanket, shielding her from the memories that haunted her. Yet, even as warmth filled the cabin, shadows of the past lurked at the edges of her mind. What if her parents came for her? What if people around town questioned her presence here? As days turned into weeks, Clara found herself slowly opening up to this new life. The deep silence of the woods began to feel familiar, the songs of birds and rustling leaves composing a melody of tranquility. Thomas taught her about the forest, how to chop wood, gather herbs, and recognize the various plants around them. Each task took her further away from the weight of her past. Soon she slashed at logs with the axe, the sharp bite of the blade echoing through the crisp air. The work became liberating, each swing a confrontation against the pain of her childhood. Her laughter rang out as she stumbled through her learning, and it felt like the chains binding her heart were slowly dissolving. But one breezy afternoon, as she sat alone on the porch watching the clouds drift past, a wave of fear surged in her chest. She whispered to the trees, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. A rustle in the underbrush made her jump, and she turned to see Thomas approaching with a bundle of firewood in his arms. He noticed her anxious expression and sat beside her. "They could come for me," she admitted, her voice low. "They could take me back." "They only think they own you," he replied firmly, his dark eyes capturing hers. "But nobody can own you, Clara." That evening they sat by the fire sharing stories. Clara told him of her childhood, the moments of laughter that had become shadowed by her parents' expectations. Thomas listened intently, offering her the openness she had long craved. He shared his own stories too, tales of hardship that had led him to embrace solitude in the woods. And slowly, their stories wove a bond between them, an understanding that began to transcend words. Clara felt herself healing, but the memories of her past still loomed like dark clouds overhead. One fateful day, everything changed. Clara was gathering wildflowers near the edge of the forest when she saw a group of people walking through the trees. Her heart skipped a beat, and her legs froze in place as she recognized them, her parents. Her mother's voice called out, strained and desperate. Panic surged through her. In that instant, a flood of emotions threatened to overwhelm her. Her heart raced, pounding in her ears as she turned and ran back to the cabin. Thomas saw her frantic expression and instinctively stepped outside, reading the urgency in her face. He asked, concern flooding his voice. Clara gasped, pointing back toward the woods. Determination swept over him and he grabbed her shoulders. "You stand your ground. You found your voice. Don't let them take it away." Trembling but resolute, Clara nodded. Together they walked to the edge of the clearing where her parents stood waiting. Clara's mother looked frantic, her eyes wild with desperation. "You don't understand, Clara," Clara shouted, her voice firm and unwavering. "I don't belong with you." Her father stepped forward, anger flickering in his eyes. "You're a mistake. You think this man will take care of you." At those words, Clara felt a surge of strength she didn't know she had. "No, I'm not nothing." Thomas stood beside her, a silent pillar of strength. She's not your possession. Clara is not defined by you. Clara felt like an invisible force had been set free inside her. The fear that had gripped her for so long was slipping away as she stared at her parents, resolute. You can't take me back. In that standoff, something broke. Clara's parents saw the fierce determination in her eyes, and the words they had spoken lingered in the air like a thunderclap. Slowly, they began to back away, disbelief weaving through their expressions. Clara watched as they turned to leave, an unexpected wave of relief washing over her. Breathing heavily, she sank to the ground, feeling as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. You did it, Thomas said softly, kneeling beside her. There was pride in his voice, and tears filled Clara's eyes. You found your voice. From that day on, Clara no longer felt like a girl caught in the storm. She had faced her demons and emerged stronger, the echoes of the past finally fading into the distance. Months passed, and Clara became part of the forest. The trees held secrets, and she learned them like friends. She made an impact on the children of the nearby town, inviting them to join her in the woods for workshops teaching them crafts, sharing stories, and helping them discover their own voices. In those interactions, she could see herself reflected in the joy of their laughter and the fearlessness of their spirit. Thomas had transformed from a rescuer into a mentor, a father figure who taught her not only survival skills, but also the value of self-worth. Clara found a sense of belonging not just in the forest, but in the hearts of those she connected with. Each day was filled with purpose, laughter, and love as the cabin turned into a sanctuary for all who were lost. Clara became a living testament to resilience, a reminder that even amidst despair, hope could flourish. But occasionally the shadows would creep back and doubt would nestle in her mind. One frosty evening, surrounded by the twinkling lights of stars, Clara whispered her fears into the night, sharing them with the gentle rustle of the wind. She wondered aloud. Thomas heard her and stepped outside, the chill of the air brushing against his cheeks. You're already free, he assured her, sitting beside her. Freedom isn't just about being away from your past. Those words anchored her. Clara began to embrace her journey, understanding that she was not defined by what had happened to her, but by how she chose to respond to it. Each day became a page in a book she was writing, her own narrative of strength. As seasons shifted, Clara continued to grow. She understood the complex beauty of being human, the reminder that no one is truly alone if they choose to connect and share their struggles. The love she shared echoed off the trees, creating a symphony that celebrated life in all its forms. Years later, the girl once cast aside because of her infertility had transformed into a remarkable young woman, a beacon for those still lost in darkness. The forest was now bursting with color and laughter, a testament to resilience and the power of love. As Clara stood at the edge of her beloved woods, she saw the children she had nurtured growing into young leaders of their own, crafting their own narratives. She felt a sense of fulfillment and pride, knowing that the journey had not just been hers. It was a collaborative transformation of shared experiences. Thomas stood with her, a silent guardian, his eyes shining with pride. Together, they had created a life woven from pain into a tapestry of hope. Clara turned to him, gratitude swelling in her heart. I never thought I could find a family here, she said. You created it, he replied, a warm smile gracing his rugged face. Every choice you made brought you to this moment. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold, Clara knew she had found her place, not just in the forest, but in the world. She had learned that worth isn't measured by the ability to bear children, but by the love shared, the lives touched, and the courage to rise above the challenges life throws our way. As darkness enveloped the forest, Clara embraced the night, knowing she had finally claimed her story and paved the way for others to reclaim theirs as well. In the heart of this sanctuary, the girl who had once felt worthless had become a powerful voice, a testament to the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit. In a dimly lit room filled with shadows, 13-year-old Clara stood frozen as she listened to the conversation that would shape the course of her life. Her mother's voice pierced the air like a dagger. What's the point of keeping her? The words echoed in Clara's mind, rattling around like 1,000 stones in a jar, each one heavier than the last. She pressed her small hands against the wall, desperate to feel something anything other than the crushing weight of her parents' disdain. This was not mere disappointment. This was a verdict that she was unworthy, a failure. Just then, the heavy wooden door creaked open, and in stepped Thomas, the lumberjack who lived at the edge of town. Broad and rugged, he had the kind of presence that filled any room, but tonight he stepped in, carrying a palpable concern in his eyes. He had heard the voices, he had witnessed the anguish. He asked, his voice deep and resonant, glancing anxiously between Clara and her parents. "Stay out of this," her father shot back, anger flickering like a candle in the wind. Clara's mother spat, her bitterness seeping through. "You think you can just waltz in?" Clara felt a flicker of hope mixed with desperation, and before she could lose her nerve, she stepped forward. "Thomas, please, help me," she whispered, vulnerability spilling over. "I'm taking her with me," Thomas declared, his eyes turning toward Clara as if he could somehow shield her from it all. The realization of what was happening hit Clara like a bolt of lightning. Was she really being offered an escape? A chance to break free from the chains of her parents' expectations? Fear and hope tangled together, and without a moment's hesitation, she grasped Thomas's hand. They stepped out of the house together, leaving behind the dim flicker of the candlelight. Clara breathed in the cool night air, feeling a sense of freedom washing over her like a fresh breeze after a long storm. The towering trees welcomed them into the forest, and as they walked deeper, Clara sensed the weight of her past lifting. Thomas led her to his cabin, nestled among the pines like a hidden jewel. It was modest but warm, filled with the comforting scent of wood smoke and pine. As he lit a fire in the hearth, Clara's heart fluttered with a mix of uncertainty and excitement. This was unfamiliar territory, and yet it felt right. "You're safe here," Thomas said, his voice gentle yet authoritative. "You can be who you want to be." But even as warmth enveloped her, Clara battled the ghosts of her past. What if her parents came looking for her? What if they tried to drag her back into the life she had just escaped? Those questions gnawed at her, lurking like shadows in the corners of her mind. Days turned into weeks, and in that time, Clara began to find her footing in this new life. Thomas became her mentor, teaching her the ways of the forest, how to chop wood, gather herbs, and appreciate the beauty of nature. Clara soaked it all in like a sponge, her laughter ringing out across the trees as she made playful attempts to learn. She spent hours swinging the axe, feeling the rhythmic moment of the blade slicing through the wood. Each thud felt like an act of reclamation, a way to carve out her new identity. The work invigorated her, pulling her further from the haunting echoes of her parents' words. But as Clara flourished, doubts would inevitably creep back in. One afternoon, while picking wildflowers along a sun-dappled path, she noticed the clouds gathering above, mirroring her turbulent thoughts. She murmured to the wind, dread settling heavily in her stomach. Thomas called from a distance, returning from the market. He could sense her unease, an instinct honed from years of solitude. "They could find me and they could take me back," she responded, the fear spilling from her lips. "Let them come," he said, his voice steady and filled with conviction. Fear and courage tangled within her, each clashing like thunder and lightning. That evening, as they sat before the fire, Clara poured out her heart, sharing her fears and doubts. Thomas listened intently, never interrupting. Sometimes the mere act of sharing was enough to dissolve the shadows lurking within. "You have the power to decide your own life," he reminded her, his eyes reflecting the flickering flames. His words anchored her, and she took them to heart. Days turned into weeks, and slowly Clara began to transform. She embraced her new identity, diving headfirst into the work and crafts that filled her time. The forest, with all its wild beauty, became her teacher, but darkness lingered. One night she awoke suddenly, gripped by fear. Clara sat up in bed, her breath quickening. Her parents' faces swam before her eyes, their disappointment etched deep into her memory. What if they found her? "Clara," Thomas said, sensing her distress as he entered the room. "I don't want to lose this," she whispered. "They can't take what's yours," he affirmed, kneeling beside her. "You fought for this life. Every moment you're here is proof you deserve it." In the days that followed, Clara put those words to the test. She found strength in the work she did, In the friendships she began to forge with neighbors who came to visit Thomas. Ready to help, the children she met quickly became her extended family, joining her in crafting toys and sharing stories. One sunny afternoon, as they played and laughed, Clara felt a warmth unfurling in her chest. Could she truly find a new family here? Could she belong somewhere after all? But just when Clara began to feel secure, a fateful day arrived. Walking through the woods, she spotted a group of silhouettes approaching. Panic surged through her like wildfire. Heart racing, she dropped the basket of berries she had been gathering. When she recognized her parents among them, horror washed over her. She gasped, retreating behind a thick tree trunk. "Stay here," Thomas commanded, stepping forward with an air of authority. Clara felt the fear bubble up inside her, despair wrapping its tendrils around her heart. Her mother shouted, voice thick with desperation. "You need to come back, home." Clara hadn't felt at home in so long. The word stung and she stepped out from behind the tree, Thomas at her side. "No," Clara declared, her voice trembling but strong. "I've chosen this life." Her father growled, frustration etched across his features. "And yet I'm the one who gets to decide," Clara replied, her anger rising like a tide. Thomas stood beside her, a towering figure of support. "She's not your burden, she's a person." "A strong person," he said, his voice deep and edged with resolve. In that moment, Clara felt a surge of bravery coursing through her. She was not the girl who would be sold off. She was her own force, claiming her identity. "You think I'm worthless, but I'm not." Her mother's face twisted into disbelief, and her father took a step back as if struck. They hadn't expected this. Clara stood firm, eyes blazing, heart steady. "Whatever life you want for me, it's not mine," Clara continued, conviction spilling out like a river breaking its banks. The silence was thick, thick as fog rolling through the trees. Her parents looked to each other, confusion and anger mingling in their expressions. "You're defying us," her father shouted. Clara shouted back, her voice rising above the chaos. "I'm Clara, and I choose my own path." With that, her parents turned away, retreating into the shadows from whence they came. Clara felt the weight on her chest lift away, replaced by exhilaration. She was free. That night, as Clara sat by the fire with Thomas, the flickering flames danced around them, creating a cocoon of warmth. "I did it," she whispered, disbelief still lacing her voice. "You stood up for yourself. You took back your power," Thomas replied, his eyes glinting with pride. Days turned to weeks, and as Clara embraced her newfound freedom, the cabin became a home for many. She invited children and families from nearby towns, sharing stories of resilience and hope, offering warmth and acceptance to those who needed it most. The laughter that filled the air was like music, and Clara began to notice a transformation not just within herself, but in others too. Every child she taught became a little ember, igniting the courage within themselves. Together, they crafted toys, wrote stories, and shared dreams as the forest came alive around them. Clara learned that her past did not define her worth. Every encounter, every story became a thread in the tapestry of her life. She wasn't just a girl who had been abandoned. She had become a monument of strength and hope. As seasons shifted, the cabin flourished. What began as a sanctuary for Clara had transformed into a community of love, acceptance, and creativity. Together, they laughed, they cried, and they fought against the shadows that sought to hold them back. With Thomas by her side, Clara journeyed deeper into her purpose. They held workshops, welcoming those who had faced hardships, orphaned children, lost souls searching for a place to call home. The bonds forged among them became unbreakable, and Clara felt herself grow, blossom like the wildflowers that danced in the spring. One evening, while the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and lavender, Clara turned to Thomas. "I never thought I could build a family here," she said, emotions swelling within her. "You created it yourself," he smiled. In the heart of the forest, among the people who had become her family, Clara had carved out a vibrant existence rooted in resilience. She had not just survived but thrived, writing her own narrative with every laugh shared, every hug given, and every child taught. As the seasons rolled on, Clara learned to embrace her life fully, a life that had been rebuilt on the ashes of pain and uncertainty. The girl who had once felt worthless had transformed into a radiant woman, a beacon of hope for all who found themselves lost in the darkness. In the end, Clara discovered that while her past could have defined her, she had chosen instead to rewrite her story. In the forest's embrace, she thrived, knowing that she was finally free to be who she was meant to be, a powerful force of nature, capable of bringing light to even the darkest of places. Clara stood in the freezing kitchen, clutching the countertop as she listened to her parents argue in the living room. The words floated through the air, sharp and cruel. "What good is she?" her mother said, voice trembling with frustration. Clara's heart dropped at the sound. At just 13, she had spent her entire life feeling like a burden, and tonight those feelings solidified into something tangible. She pressed her back against the wall, cold wood digging into her spine. Pictures of a happy family hung crookedly around her. They felt like a cruel joke now, remnants of a life that felt increasingly hollow. Her parents couldn't see the girl behind the label, the child who yearned to be loved for who she was, not what she wasn't. All she heard from them were words like infertile and worthless, tossed around like weapons meant to harm. Just then, a heavy knock echoed through the house, making Clara jump. Someone was at the door. Her heart raced. She dared to hope it might be someone who could help her, someone who could lead her away from the hurt surrounding her. When the door creaked open, a tall figure stood silhouetted against the fading light. Thomas, the lonely lumberjack who lived at the edge of town. He called, his voice deep yet kind. Her parents exchanged looks of annoyance and disbelief. Her father snapped, clearly irritated by the interruption. "I'm here for Clara," Thomas replied, ignoring the hostility. "I heard you're having trouble." The tension in the room thickened like fog as Clara's heart pounded in her chest. Could he really be offering her a way out? "Please take me with you," she whispered, desperation making her voice tremble. Her mother sneered. "You don't get to decide who takes her." "Not like this," Thomas shot back, determination radiating from him. "You're selling her." The conversation spiraled. Her parents' voices mingled in a chorus of anger and denial, while Clara felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to jump into the unknown. "I want to go," she said firmly, stepping into the light of the doorway, her heart racing. "Please, Thomas." With that, he reached for her hand, and in that simple gesture, Clara left the shackles of her past behind. As they stepped into the cool, open air, it felt like the first breath of freedom she had ever taken. They walked in silence through the forest, the trees towering above them, branches swaying gently in the breeze. Clara listened to the sounds of the night, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl's soothing symphony that wrapped around her like a comforting hug. Each step away from her home seemed to lift a burden she had carried for far too long. The cabin was modest, nestled among the tall pines. As Thomas opened the door, the warmth enveloped her. Clara stood on the threshold, absorbing the sight of her new home. The walls were lined with wood, rough and solid, echoing strength and stability. A fire crackled in the hearth, promising warmth and safety. "Welcome," Thomas said, stepping aside to let her enter. The weight of those words settled around her. Home. It felt impossible after the rejection she had faced. Clara slowly stepped inside, feeling the warmth seep into her bones as she closed the door behind her. She murmured, insecurity creeping in like a shadow. "They'll see who you are," Thomas assured her. "You're not just someone they can dismiss." But even as he spoke, Clara felt the old fears gnawing at her. What if she let him down? What if she couldn't find a place for herself in this new life? Perhaps she was simply destined to be unwanted. Thomas seemed to sense her turmoil, and he nodded as if recognizing the battle within her. "Let's take it one day at a time," he suggested. Clara awoke the next morning to sunlight streaming through the window, casting a warm glow over the cabin. She pushed herself out of bed, excitement bubbling within her at the thought of a new day. She felt free, like a bird just learning to spread its wings. As they stepped outside together, the fresh scent of pine filled her lungs. The forest surrounding them was alive with sounds, birds chirping, leaves rustling in the wind. Thomas had equipped her with practical clothes and sturdy boots, ready to face whatever the day had in store. "Today, we'll learn the craft of gathering wood," Thomas said, leading her deeper into the forest. "Every tree has a story to tell." With each log she lifted, with every swing of the axe, Clara felt stronger. She relished the labor, the sweat trickling down her back serving as a reminder that she was alive and capable. Thomas was patient, teaching her the right techniques, and each small victory blossomed confidence within her. But as the warmth of the sun bathed them in light, shadows still stretched across her mind. Clara asked cautiously, a hint of fear flickering in her voice. "They can't take what's yours," Thomas replied, kneeling beside her to meet her gaze. "You're safe here." That night, as they gathered around the fire, the crackling flames offered a calming rhythm. Clara began to share snippets of her life, fragments of joy tangled with despair. Each word poured out of her, setting free the chains she had clung to for far too long. Thomas listened intently, the flickering fire casting warm shadows on his face. "You've endured so much," he said softly, "but you are more than the pain of your past." Yet the scars stayed with her. Days turned into weeks, and while Clara thrived in her new identity, old fears still clung like fog. One chilly evening, she lay awake in bed, tossing and turning as the night stretched on. She sat up, the weight of anxiety pressing down on her. What if they came for her? What if they didn't see how far she had come? Just then she heard a soft knock at her door. It was Thomas, his figure illuminated by the faint glow of the moonlight. He asked, sensing her unrest. "No," Clara admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It won't," he reassured her, sitting at the edge of her bed. "You've broken the chains that held you." Those words hung in the air, a beacon of light cutting through the darkness. Clara felt a flicker of hope spring forth, but it was quickly snuffed out by the memories of her parents' disappointment. Despite her fears, Clara pushed herself the next day. She joined Thomas in the forest, listening intently as he taught her about the flora and fauna, all while trying to push down the unease arising deep within her. The rhythmic tasks, the chores, the laughter they shared filled her heart with purpose, but her past loomed like a storm cloud overhead. And then one day, while Clara was out gathering herbs, she turned a corner and stumbled into a group of neighbors who had come to seek Thomas. They were small, friendly faces, their laughter echoing through the air like a pleasant melody. Clara felt a pang of longing but was gripped by uncertainty. One of the children asked, pointing at her with wide eyes. "Clara," Thomas replied, stepping in, his protective stance sending warmth through her. "She's new here." But Clara's heart raced. Would they accept her? Would they see her as a burden? She felt invisible, just another shadow beneath the reaching trees. Days turned into a blur of interactions, and slowly the kids began to include her. They invited her to play games, sharing their stories, their laughter spilling life into the air. Yet the darker thoughts still crept in. One afternoon, as Clara sat outside contemplating the flow of the nearby stream, doubt washed over her unexpectedly. What if they didn't want someone like her in their lives? "You're not less than them, Clara." A familiar voice broke through her thoughts. Thomas had approached, resting a hand on her shoulder. She said, the vulnerability spilling from her eyes. "They don't know your story, only that you're a part of this community now," Thomas responded. "Soon, they'll see your strength." That day ended with Clara participating in the children's games, a dance that signified breaking through the bindings of her past. She felt the laughter bubble up, lightness weaving through her heart for the first time in what felt like an eternity. But just as she began to lean into her new life, the air turned cold one evening. Clara sat with Thomas, sharing stories again, but undercurrents of tension wrapped around them. "Maybe I should go back," Clara blurted out, fear gnawing once again. "What if they forget me?" "Clara, you're here now," Thomas urged, reaching for her. "Your past doesn't define who you are." But as reassuring as his words were, the dread weighing on her wouldn't let go. Then, one fateful afternoon, Clara's worst fears materialized. She was collecting berries when she heard shouting in the distance, voices climbing higher as they drew closer. Panic raced through her, and her heart thundered as she dropped the basket and ran back toward the cabin. Thomas was outside, already perceiving the storm brewing in her expression. He asked, brows knitted in concern. "They're here," she gasped, pointing toward the sound. Clara could hear the footsteps thudding through the trees, her heart sinking as doom washed over her. With a sudden surge of protective instinct, Thomas straightened, filling the doorway with his broad frame. "Stay behind me," he commanded. Clara felt frozen but knew she would not succumb to fear again. This was her chance to stand up, to choose her own path once and for all. The voices grew closer, a mixture of anger and urgency echoing in the air. Her father shouted as they broke through the brush, his face wild and frantic. "You need to come home with us." She screamed, her voice cutting through the tension like a hot knife. "I won't go back." The confrontation hung in the air, heavy with the weight of conflict as her parents glared at Clara, disbelief etched across their features. Her mother pleaded, desperation in her voice. "We don't want you to be lost." Clara yelled, drawing energy from Thomas, his presence a fortress shielding her against the storm. Thomas stepped forward, standing tall beside her. "You don't own her." Tension surged, waves of anger and pain colliding as Clara faced her past head-on. Would they see her? Would they recognize the strength she had found? And as the air crackled with conflict, Clara found herself standing at a critical crossroads. Would she retreat into the shadows of her past, or would she hold fast to the light she had discovered? The confrontation weighed heavily on her heart, the outcome hanging in the air, and Clara felt the breath of the forest around her, each heartbeat resonating with the determination she was forging. What awaited her as she stared into the eyes of her turbulent past, freedom or chains? And just as the tension reached a breaking point, darkness loomed over her future, waiting for the choices she was yet to make.